Welcome to this formal board meeting of the Cairngorms National Park Authority. My name is Sandy Bremner, the board convener. This meeting is being live streamed, and a very warm welcome to anyone watching or listening to our proceedings online. We have apologies from Chiva Blackett, Lauren McCallum, Derek Ross and Steve Micklewright. I'll now ask the clerks to take a roll call.
Chris Beattie.
Good morning, Present.
Sandy Bremner.
Present.
Jackie Beard.
Present.
Pete Cosgrove.
Present.
Kenny Deans. Paul Gibb.
Here.
Hannah Christ.
Morning.
Russell Jones.
Good morning.
John Kirk. Bill Logan.
Yeah.
Eleanor McIntosh.
Hi. Yeah.
Sally McDade. Shona McLean.
Morning.
Duncan Miller.
Morning.
Anne Ross.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. Item 2, approval of minutes from previous meetings. So minutes from the 28th of June formal board meetings. Are there any points of accuracy on the minute? Thank you very much. We'll take that as an accurate record. Item 3, matters arising not covered elsewhere. So action point from the draft minutes from the 22nd of March 2024. Paper 1, CEO report at paragraph 7, CEO to prepare a briefing note on farming activity and statistics within the Cairngorms National Park and to distribute to the board. Now that's in hand. I should say that preliminary data has been received. Staff capacity to progress this has been limited by the vacancy in the agricultural officer post, but recruitment for that position is now about to begin. Action points from the latest meeting on the 28th of June 2024, paper 1, CEO report at paragraph 7.1, ensuring maintenance of sites and surroundings on credit marker entry points. That's in hand. The Glenlivet marker was the main issue, and Glenlivet Estate is now undertaking maintenance. Paper 3, update on the integrated wildfire management plan. At paragraph 13.2, the board member highlighted there was a need to clarify on land holdings to show expectations and managers. That's completed. A working definition is included in the draft plan. Paper 4, which plan at paragraph 16.3, share affordability of inflation with local businesses. That's in hand. Our Head of Communications Engagement has emailed the CEO of the Cairngorms Business Partnership with full information on translation services, and we've asked for this to be included in an upcoming newsletter to partner businesses. Paper 5, Capercaillie Emergency Plan, at paragraph 20.4, board convener to write to the Minister to prioritise a Pine Martin survey reflecting concerns expressed by the board and asking for a meeting. That's completed, and a meeting has been set for the 9th of October. Point 5, succinct summary of the wider benefits of funding, for example, the expansion of woodland benefits of biodiversity. That's completed. Move on to item 4, declarations of interest. So none have been received in advance, and I'd simply ask members to note the provisions in the board memo for the meeting with regard to item 5, paper 1, that noted. Are there any declarations of interest? We have none. Thank you very much. And we move on to papers. Item 5, paper 1, the CEO report and convener update. So this is for information. It'll be introduced by Grant Moyer, CEO. As part of this report, Grant will provide an update on the latest developments in Scottish Government finance. On that point, a full review of forecasts and commitments is currently underway for report back to the board. Grant.
Yeah, good morning everyone. And yes, I will take any questions on the paper. I'll highlight a few parts as we go along. Let's just a little bit closer. So yes, on the budget, as you know, there have been restrictions placed on government on travel, events, external recruitment and marketing and communications. The Park Authority will also not receive any nature restoration funding in this financial year. We've managed the necessary changes to ensure that the operational plan commitments will still be able to be met. We have an extra meeting of the Resources Committee scheduled for the 4th of October, where we'll be setting out the amended budget and discussing that with the committee as well. On the recruitment side of things, we'll be taking forward recruitment of 3 posts that are critical for delivering services, including 2 in planning for the statutory function, where we've had recent vacancies from people leaving the organisation for other roles. In terms of the bigger picture in the budget, the Scottish Budget is set for the 4th of December, and we will have an initial discussion with members on the consequences of that on the 13th of December, when we have a scheduled planning committee in place. Just to say a couple of things on wider things that have also happened in the past few weeks. We've had the Programme for Government, which sets out a number of new bills. The most important one to highlight to the board is the Nature Environment Bill, which will set out statutory biodiversity targets, changes in the deer legislation and changes to the National Parks Act. We do not yet have any detail on the timescale for the bill or when it will be introduced, or what will be exactly covered, other than the information that the board has seen that we previously commented on the 3 relevant consultations associated with those 3 parts of the Nature Environment Bill. In terms of just one other thing that's happening, and that wider part, obviously the new national park, the initial work is underway by Nature Scot in that area, and there will be a formal consultation later this autumn for 3 months of people within Calgary as well. In terms of the report, just a couple of things to highlight. One is the Climate Adaptation Fund, which is number 1, and also on page 3, the visitor infrastructure side of things, just to say that between those, that's over £500,000 that have gone into businesses and communities across the national park in terms of funding. In this financial year, there's lots of good projects that are being helped to make happen within the national park, and obviously we saw some of those when we went out on one of the farms a couple of weeks ago. But I think there's some really good news there in terms of what the National Park Authority is doing to help support people across the national park. And the other thing just to highlight was that yesterday we had around 400 young people and dozens of exhibitors for the Careers Fair in Aviemore. It really was a great success. Massive thanks to all the staff at the Park Authority and Learning Scotland for organising, and all the businesses that gave up their time to attend. I think that's all of it that I wanted to highlight, but happy to take any questions on anything within the overall report. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Just on that last point, the careers event was absolutely incredible. Fantastic interaction from young people from across the national park, seeing the opportunities for careers on their doorstep that they didn't realise were there as potential opportunities. It was an amazing experience. Last now for any questions on the polls. Fiona.
Is that actually a comment, and it's on the convener's report? So is that, were you going to go on to that, or?
Please carry on.
No, okay. No, I just wanted to note how impressed I am with the extent of the activities that our convener has been undertaking. I think he's been demonstrating his passion and dedication, and no doubt it's pioneering and inspiring leadership. But no, I think it's really great to know that our convener's getting out and about and working so hard on our behalf. Talking about our values, I just feel, I've not mentioned before, but there was no mention within this paper about how the board is going to reflect and subscribe to these values. I do feel that's really important, and I'm hoping that a session to consider how we demonstrate these really important values will take place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those incredibly kind words and noted on the values. Any other questions on the report? No other questions. Thank you very much. We move on to item 7, paper 2, the National Park Partnership Plan Annual Update. Sorry, I didn't.
No, I didn't raise my hand, Sandy. Sorry. I thought you were going to do a preamble to your report, and I have a question on that.
Please carry on.
Okay, thank you. It was on point 16 on page 12 of 12 regarding Braemar. The presentation to the traffic management options were presented in May, and consultation on that at the Community Council last month. They asked what would happen if the community rejected the proposals with specific regard to the funding that was set aside. Would that still remain available for other proposals, or if the proposals were rejected, would the funding be lost and used elsewhere? Thank you.
These proposals are at an early stage, but I'll ask Grant to pick up on the funding question.
I think Colin actually would pick up on this, but it's not necessarily a Cairngorms 2030 thing. This is linked more to Aberdeenshire Council, but I'll pass across to Colin.
Colin Simpson, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The initial work, the engagement stages, the referral stages 1 and 2 of the 7-stage process were undertaken by us through the Cairngorms 2030 project. The Aberdeenshire Council then indicated, because they also had some ambitions to do something similar themselves, that they would actually pick up on the next stage. So at the moment, the funding's actually all coming through Aberdeenshire Council rather than from ourselves. Depending on what they come out with through the further engagement, it may be that they come back to us to get some support towards it. But at the moment, the funding's theirs rather than ours. So I can't say definitely whether they would be willing to consider using it for different options.
So, Community Councils, is that funding that has been suggested that has been allocated ring-fenced until a decision is made by the Aberdeenshire Council?
Again, I can't be 100% certain, but the local authorities have some funding direct from government for active travel and related projects, and my understanding was they were using part of their council allocation for that. But as I say, I don't know how fixed that is at being spent in a specific location, or whether it might be shifted elsewhere or shifted to a different purpose if the community said they didn't want something that was proposed.
Paul.
Sorry, your answer is very clear, but it's just to help my understanding. So is there no money that the park itself has set aside as part of its active travel budget for this piece of work?
Not at this stage. We have for want of a better term, we have a kitty for doing active travel work throughout the Cairngorms 2030 project, but it's not earmarked for specific projects at this stage. That will come through the further engagement that's underway at the moment.
Thank you, Colin. Question, Russell Jones.
Thanks, Convener. Apologies for being a bit slow coming in. It was just on Grant's report, item 11, active and sustainable transport. I mean, there is some fantastic work coming up in Cairngorms 2030 and active travel within the park and cycle-friendly Cairngorms, etc. I just wondered, are we talking to ScotRail, etc., about making it easier for people to get here with bikes, etc.? I mean, I had experience of that a couple of weeks ago, trying to get bikes on and off trains, and to be honest, it's extremely difficult. And we might well end up with fantastic infrastructure here, but people can't actually get here, and so it kind of defeats the purpose if they're then travelling by car or whatever to come here.
Absolutely. Grant.
Yeah, no, there's discussions with that. I suppose that the majority of people, even in the future, will still arrive by car. I mean, that's one thing that will, even our ambitious proposal we've got in the National Park Partnership Plan, we've still got the majority of people coming by car. But we are discussing with both the bus side of things and the rail side of things as to how we can make it better to get to the national park. But obviously some of those are much bigger national conversations around Highland Main Line and stuff like, where we're working with Cairngorms Council and Highland Council as well, but we'll put a bit of pressure on around those sorts of things. So we are in those discussions, but we are mainly focused at within the national park rather than necessarily focusing on the stuff outside the park. But where we can add a voice, we are doing so.
Thank you. Hannah Grist.
Thanks, convener. Just coming back to Grant's report on the section on communication and engagement, I also want to kind of second Fiona's about the amount of work that seems to be happening both by our convener and by the rest of the park staff. I think all the communications work that we've been doing has been fantastic and really useful in terms of building our profile and the value of national parks. I know there were some concerns over the budget cuts and how that would affect our communications. So what are any comments moving forward on how we can maintain this profile whilst being expected to obviously reduce some of our spend on this?
Grant.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we still have a comms team, and we'll still be doing lots of organic content, and there's lots of things that we can do in terms of comms. But there's no doubt that if we have less of a budget to put into comms and engagement and events and all these sorts of things than we had previously. So there will be a hit in terms of that over the next 6 months. We will still be able to do our residents magazine in the next editions in November time, which will allow us to still get out information around the fire bylaws and LDP and all that sort of thing. So we'll still be able to do those things. We'll still be able to do content, but there will be a downturn in the amount that we can do in terms of directly targeting and engagement around that. And I think we've just got to be aware there will be a slight drop off in terms of some of those things. I'm hopeful that it will be a relatively short term thing, but at the moment it's in place, and we'll wait to see in terms of where that is. And we'll also have to look at what that means in terms of implications for budget for next year as well.
Thank you, Grant. I'll just ask Oliver Ollie Davis, our Head of Communications and Engagement, to expand on that answer. Ollie.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I think Grant's covered the main points. The one thing I'd say, I suppose, is the targeted nature of comms is the thing that suffers most. Obviously, we've got fairly decent following, particularly on social media, for example. But when we're looking for specific audiences, the Your Future Here conference, for example, yesterday, that requires a specific, not necessarily large spend, but that's now off the table. So it's those things where we're looking for nuance, where it's particularly difficult, albeit Cairngorm's 2030 ring fence lottery money is helping with some of that targeted work, but not all of it. So as Grant says, we are going to have to be aware of that, I think, going forward.
Thank you very much. Jackie Brereton.
Thanks. Grant, just a sort of general point around reporting. I know that we've got reports coming on the 2030 progress to next week's resource meeting, but in future, will we get some kind of overview at the full board meeting? Because I feel that I don't understand all the different strands of the 2030 strategy that are going on.
Grant.
Yeah, so the quarterly reports go to the performance committee. So the next performance committee is next Friday, is it? Yeah, next Friday. So, and those go to the board. So they are part of the paper. So any member can look at all of those. But we can certainly append the quarterly reports to the minutes that we have in terms of the performance committee that come up to the board. So you'll be able to see all the progress throughout the quarters associated with that. Because there's quite a detailed report that goes to the performance committee on what's happened. Yeah.
Any other questions on the reports? No, the members will apologise for being too quick off the mark initially. We are now moving on to item 6.2, the National Park Partnership Plan Annual Update. It's for information, and the board is being asked to note the progress summarised in the paper and the associated annex. As you'll see, the update records really significant progress in most areas of our work. It's an impressive record by any standards, with a clear acknowledgement of the challenges ahead. The update is being introduced by Gavin Miles, Director of Planning and Place. Gavin.
Thank you, Sandy. Yes, I'm not going to say a lot because the intention of the covering report was to highlight the sort of the key points from the year and the highlights, and then the appendix has further information on all of the main points from each of the three themes. I think, as convener said, there's good progress at year 2 of what is a very long-term plan. So we're in a good stage at this point, and we're now getting into the meaty part of delivery at the middle of the partnership plan timescale. And Start again there. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So at this point in the timing of the partnership plan, as we come into the middle of it, we reach that stage where we will start to see more indication of whether work needs extra effort over the next 3 years in this next year, because people have been, partners have all been working hard on their plans so far, with delivery as we would expect. As we get into this next year, and particularly with budget cuts across the public sector, we may notice some other changes, which mean we have to think harder in the future years.
Thank you, Gavin. Are there any comments or questions? Fiona.
Sorry, I'm always quick off the mark. Fantastic. I endorse what Sandy said there. Really good to see the progress that's being made in most of the activities. There is one though where should I say I'm a wee bit disappointed at the lack of progress, and that is C10, the cultural heritage. It suggests that there's going to be options for a cultural heritage network to be considered in 2024-25. I kind of feel this is a wee bit of a pushback, because we did get a report from the consultants in March 2024, and yet nothing's happening this year. And I wondered if there was any way in which we could maybe move things forward a bit, because I am concerned that we hope to achieve an increasing number of community-led cultural heritage projects being delivered. And I'm not sure if we're going to achieve that if we don't get a bit of move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, well, we are in 2024-25 now, so the intention is to do that work in this financial year, depending on resources available for that. So, and this is obviously reporting for last year. So in this year, that is something we'll do, and that's something we'll have to bring back to the board as well, because there would be financial implications to that, which in the current climate, we don't have money to spend on that. But this is an area that we'll have to come back to here.
Thank you. Paul Gibb.
I have a few questions I'd like to explore around A1 net zero, and I just want to make a comment at the beginning that I've made no opinion on net zero. I've been known what my position is, but I wouldn't want my questions to presume I'm sharing it. I just want to understand the calculation, how we're computing this. So in the paper, we have, just moving my data, baseline information for emissions. So some very clear information on the annual emissions from residents, visitors while in the park, the emissions of visitors travelling to and from the national park, and emissions from industry. And we can get a total for what the annual emissions are. But net zero is a balance between emissions and absorption and sequestration. There's no information on absorption or sequestration. So I'm unable to measure, looking at this, what our current net zero position is, what our carbon footprint is. So can you tell me what it was in 2022 when this work began, what it is now, and whether you get it in 2025?
So we maybe should have put a hyperlink into the Small World Consulting reports that we have presented to the board in the past, which has these figures and the detail of calculations, which is very complicated, takes some time to understand. And that has, I suppose, a glide path showing the projections. If you assume that reductions in future will happen across various categories, and assume that we continue to restore peatlands and create woodlands at the rates that the partnership plan sets out, that shows that in effect we'll be reaching net zero. The national park area will reach net zero sometime, depending on the precision, in the next couple of years. We may have reached it. It's a very broad category, obviously, but in general terms, it would be roundabout now. And that's based on the large areas of woodland and peatland that we have in the park, and restoring peatlands so that they stop emitting carbon at the same rates in future. The point about monitoring the data there, with Small World Consulting are preparing a dashboard tool that will allow us to have annual reports that show progress based on some key indicators in a slightly simpler way, without having to take the multiple very, very complicated data sets that they used for the initial baselining exercise. So I think the simplest thing for the detail is that we send you the link to the Small World Consulting report, where you can get all of the detail and write into the figures if you want, in the way that they are calculated.
Paul, you want to follow up?
I would like to, yes, thank you. I have been to the Small World web. Thank you. I have been to the Small World Consulting website and a number of other sites to look at how these emissions and absorption calculations are made. I really would like to see this information in this paper more clearly, so that not only I, as a board member, but the community can see, when they see the papers, what that progress is. Going to papers which are complex and difficult to follow doesn't give us that pathway. There are concerns within the community about this pathway, about the timeline, and about some of the implications on industry. C, so baseline 2022, including the emissions of visitors travelling to and from the park. And for example, that includes somebody coming from America, hiring a car in London, coming up here and spending 2 weeks in Scotland, including the park. Is that an example of someone travelling to and from the park?
Part of that, yes, is an example of somebody coming to and from the park. So again, this is quite complicated, but Small World Consulting did look at that, and they're attributing part of that footprint to the park. So if they visit the national park as part of their visit, then yes, part of that will be part of the figure. But it's not as simple as saying a foreign visitor visits the national park while on holiday in the UK, therefore all of their contribution, all of the carbon emissions from their travel is attributed to the national park. It doesn't work like that. It's spread across the place they're likely to visit, and it's clearly not based on individuals and their actual travel patterns. It's based on the data that's available around international travel and the way that visitors behave when they reach the UK. So it's not a this person has this footprint. It's visitors in their entirety have this footprint, and then it's split up into the kind of geographic areas where they go to.
This is an interesting topic. So in terms of trying to understand absorption and sequestration, I was looking at the number of trees and the absorption rate of carbon dioxide by trees. And so can you tell me how many trees are there in a national park? I know how many there are in Scotland. There's apparently 2 billion, but I can't find anywhere on any website how many trees there are in a national park. Can you give me enough number?
No, I can't. It's possible another member of staff could. We tend to consider woodland as an area and use that way of calculating the sort of sequestration rather than individual trees.
7% of the national park is woodland, but it's also forestry and scrub. So I'm trying to figure out, are we at net zero? I would really like to know how that progress is making. And just looking, and I just want to say this, from reading on websites that a tree will absorb 25 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year, so 0.025 tons per year. If we have 26.5 million trees in the park, we're at net zero already, because that will produce 662,000, or it will absorb 662,000 tons of CO2, and our emissions are 664. There's some really easy measurements, I think, that can help us understand.
I don't think it's quite as simple as that, though, because it depends on the age of your trees. It depends on what state they are in their life cycle. Yeah, but then we've got. Yeah.
Why does that keep turning off? So there are lots of different people measuring things in different ways. That's why I'd like to see the report on how we're measuring and how we're tracking through that process. So 25 kilograms. It's a range between 10 and 40, depending on the age of the tree. But a 35-year-old tree, and a relatively mature tree, will absorb 25 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year. If we do the maths on that, if you have 26.5 million trees absorbing that amount of carbon dioxide per year, we are at net zero. We have 2 billion trees in Scotland. Do we have 26.5 in the National Park? And that's only one of those methods of absorbing or sequestering carbon. I was looking at moorland, so peatland, for example. We have 252,124 hectares of peatland. And the absorption rate on peatland is 1.23 tonnes of CO2 per year. Currently, 264,000 hectares will absorb 326,369 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. That, the trees, we are way into net zero. So I think I'd like to see reported here what our progress is. And I look forward to seeing the dashboard from these guys. I really would like to see it now, because all I see in this paper and others is the emissions and the problem, and not what the progress and the outcome.
I think that if we send you the link to the Small World Consulting paper done for the National Park, that will give you the answers, actually, because that has the detail, and different types of woodland on different types of ground lead to different assumptions about their carbon sequestration. The peatlands in the National Park as well, the reason we have a peatland team and lots of people doing work on peatlands is that different peatlands are still carbon at very high rates. Some of them will be stable, some of them are not. And actually the peatland restoration work that we're doing is about stopping the emission, diffuse pollution, basically, of carbon reaching the atmosphere out of these peatlands, not about storing it per se, it's stopping it, releasing it. Those two things in the national park are by massively the biggest carbon sequestration, stopping the carbon emitting from peatlands and helping it to be stored there, and then through woodland increasing, that increases the carbon sequestration in some cases, not in all cases. And those two things are the bulk of storing carbon, stopping it emitting, and dwarf the emissions from the national park activities, I suppose, activities of people within the national park and of visitors coming to the national park as well, because this is a part of Scotland with a lot of peatland and a lot of woodland, and we're making those contributions to Scotland and to the UK and to the world as well here. It's inevitable different places will be doing different things. Places, dense cities, will have a much higher carbon emission sort of record than dispersed rural communities and areas with no people in them.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Paul, for the question. Sorry,
I just want to say thank you for that. Look, I look forward to the report. I just want to see the clarity so I can understand that progress, and I think we should publish that clarity so that there aren't other folk like me who are going to websites and trying to compute this and perhaps coming to the wrong conclusion, that we're seeing that here and we are informing ourselves at the board of that progress. So thank you.
That's what we want to do, but we want that simple information there that tracks the big things that make the biggest difference.
Thanks, Gavin. Thanks, Paul, for the questions. I think we're all better informed now than we were a few minutes ago. I've got further questions from Eleanor McIntosh, Bill Lobban and John Kirk. Eleanor.
Yeah, I can't compete with that question in Paul, but my hat's off to you. You seem to have got your head well round it, so I appreciate what you're saying there. My point is more general, Gavin, in that I feel the report is really positive, and I think that's a good thing. And I think great work by the staff for delivering on where we are at the minute. I'm more worried about what's not happening or what's in danger, and I would like to see those things pulled out a wee bit more so that I can really properly do my job as a board member in scrutinising why they're not happening and can be done to make them happen. Do you think that's a fair comment? I just feel reading that it's all good, and that's great. If it's all good, perfect, I'm happy. But I've got this sneaky feeling that it's maybe not all as good as that, especially given the climate that we're in with funding and our partners' position as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the point I was trying to make, I suppose, at the start of this was that actually when we get into next year, I think that the potential for things to slow down becomes much clearer, and that's when we'll be wanting to report those things, because at that point we'll know, hey, we've only got another 2.5 years left to do this, and if it's not going to be possible, we'd want to flag that up. Bearing in mind this is the work of lots and lots of different partners as well, so our ability to track instantly is limited here. So we're relying on people telling us the implications of any budget changes or other structural changes they've got, or other pressures within the system. So I think that when we come to next year, that's when we start to see a bit of, I suppose, the cold reality of those pressures hitting us, and we'd want to flag them up, particularly because we won't be able to pick up all the gaps from other people either. So we need to be able to identify those points so that we can say that this is something that we're not going to be able to reach in the next 5 years. It may still be a priority beyond that, and that we'll want to consider another partnership plan. But if the work can't happen in the next few years, then it won't happen, and that's something we'll need to take on board.
Hey, and Grant, on a follow-up to that.
Yeah, I suppose the key bit for me is what happens on the 4th of December will have a big impact on what we can do in terms of MPP delivery next year, not just us, but across the organisations. I suppose the one that I would flag up at the moment is just on the transport side of things, is obviously we're having a number of discussions with Transport Scotland and Sustrans and others around that package of active travel side of things, and what does that look like in terms of not just in this financial year but next financial year, and what is available, because that will make a big difference as to what we can deliver through all the active travel, both in care and return charity, but wider side of things. But that's probably the main bit at the moment that I would flag up. But there may be others that we'll need to wait and just see what the budgets are in terms of things like peatland restoration, nature restoration, etc. in 25, 26, and what impacts that'll have on the national park, because that will have a significant impact potentially on the delivery of the park plan.
Thank you, Grant. We have further questions from Bill Lobbin, John Kirk, Anne Ross and Fiona McLean. Bill.
Actually, it's almost on the same point that was just raised. This is really a great historical look at what we've delivered. But I think we really need to be seriously looking at the way forward and not wait until next year until we look back and see how good it's been or how bad it's possibly been. Because almost all of our partners are in exactly the same situation as we are. And this may extend way beyond the December deadline for a budget setting, because there may not be a budget setting in December. And you could be looking at a completely different scenario early in the new year. So I think we need to be serious about the fact that some of the things that are within the partnership plan we may not be able to deliver, and we shouldn't wait until such time as we're reporting them not being delivered. But we should say it as early as possible, look, and hold our hands up and say, we just can't deliver that anymore.
Thank you. I think point taken, absolutely. Further on that, we're planning the horizon scanning session that we promised for a meeting in November. Next question, John Kirk.
It's regarding on planning, there's 25 houses at Bessie Bridge at the railway station. Can we put pressure on the reporter to get a result in this? Because this could be a very, very positive result for the community if we could get these houses going. And there's a big call for them. Thank you.
John, I suppose we can't. That's a decision for ministers to make. And not, that's a decision for ministers to make.
Thank you very much. Anne Ross.
Thank you. Thank you. On page 30, and you refer to the small, petite. You refer to the referrals for the green health referrals and it talks the progress for 22-23. It says 3 green health referrals since April 23, the start of scheme, and then 16 health walks. And then I look at the progress for 24, it goes up to 24. Is the figure for 22-23, does that mean it's 3, I'm going to use an example, GP practices taking part, or does that mean that there were 3 individuals referred?
Yeah, that was related to the start of that programme. So that, in effect, those were the first 3 that happened into that reporting. It's then picked up a lot. So we've also spoken about that. And there are all the GP practices in Baden and Strathspey are now part of that and participated in the Green Health Referral Scheme. So there are lots of Green Health referrals now happening in Baden and Strathspey. So we'll have much more interesting stats, I suppose, and a bit more assessment of what's happening and the success of those when we come to future years. That's what the team are doing now.
Could I come back, please?
And just to say, there's one stat, should say that there's a stat missing from there, which is that in 22-23 we've reported the 16 health walks active. We haven't actually reported the health walks that are active in 23-24. They're 2 different things, but we've only got it in for 1 year, so there's something missing in there that we'll add in.
If I could come back, please. I think it's a great initiative. What was did you have an idea of how many individuals you expected to be participating in this? Did you have a sort of peak number, a maximum number that could take part, or?
No, I don't think so. Not at this point, because in effect we're piloting this through the project and setting it up. So we'll get more information on the numbers of people who might be referred, and then the capacity to actually take them out as that goes on. So we need that evidence. There isn't the health service itself doesn't have a target or a number of people who'd benefited from this. Is quite pioneering work, so we'll get more information on that. And as the practices now are participating, then that they will start to think about the number of patients that they have who may benefit from it. So we'll get better information as this goes on.
Thank you. So we've been talking about budgets, and I'm not going to preempt anything being cut or not being cut or whatever. But if this was something which had to be, ended up being cut, are there other organisations out there, board or social care partnerships, that could pick this up?
So at the moment, this is funded through Cairngorms 2030, so it's not a danger of being cut. As long as there are GP practices and we still have outdoor activity providers, health walks, there's no reason to think that this is going to change. And as a sort of public health element, it's hard to see this changing, because this is about preventing people being ill, so it reduces pressure on the NHS in the long run.
Thank you. I think it's a great resource. I was just concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from Fiona McLean, followed by Duncan.
Thank you. And I'm just following up on what Eleanor said, and I think I also had a sense that, there wasn't. I'd like to know more about where maybe things or being indicating where things maybe weren't going to plan. And I just wondered, in terms of the format of this, whether some thought might be given to how to approach that, maybe with a RAG rating. I'm quite familiar with other organisations where when they give us their annual update, that it's described in a RAG rating. And I find that incredibly useful, because then it allows me to go through and just check where are the real problems and what's being done to mitigate them. So it was just a thought about maybe how we approach this in future. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. We'll have to think hard about that, because there are different elements, I suppose, of this around the long-term outcomes, the shorter-term objectives, and then the different bits of work which happen within them. And sometimes a simple red, amber, green doesn't really give you it gives you a headline, but it doesn't necessarily explain sometimes how complicated the relationship between different things within there is. We'll have a think about how to do that in a way that makes sense.
Thank you. Duncan Miller.
Yeah, mine's just for clarity on A2 on woodland expansion on the natural regeneration, which says through herbivore management. Is that exclusion of herbivore or getting herbivores in to help manage that.
Andy Ford.
That's calculating the forest grant schemes which support forest expansion through control. So that's not behind fencing, that's through deer control.
It's just, it'd be quite nice. Well, my understanding is like natural generation is you want to get animals within these plantations to make some disturbance and get these seed beds disturbed to get natural regeneration to come. So I don't know if there's something like the park can help lead on or influence about getting herbivores, maybe excluding deer, but other cattle, pigs, to help manage this natural regeneration projects, with actual managed, because I think from my kind of brief research is that, and it kind of touches on Paul's point as well, that carbon sequestration can be better in these natural regeneration woodlands with grasslands managed. You can actually get better carbon sequestration with a managed grassland and woodland. So to work with landowners and land managers to actually get cattle or sheep into these areas and not just exclude them, because my understanding is once a grass plant grows, it puts its seed head up and then dies over, it's actually then emitting carbon. But if we can keep grasslands kind of managed within that, I think it's got a multitude of benefits. That's just
thanks, Duncan. Andy, if you want to come back.
Good point. I think we might be conflating forest expansion through natural regeneration and forest enhancement, i.e. management within existing forests. So I think the cattle grazing trials and the pigs and etc. to break up ground would be classified as forest enhancement. You're quite right that natural regeneration is one of the least carbon disruptive methods because there's no soil disturbance in planting, which is why natural regeneration is good, but that's expansion. In terms of the enhancement programs, the Park Authority is completely supportive of cattle grazing and of all other methods of putting herbivores in forests. We have been supporting that through things like the Kapakele project and encouraging the forest grant scheme to be able to support that in national parks. So we're wholly behind that.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Board. In which case, is the Board content to note progress as summarised in the paper and the associated index? And that's noting our aspiration for higher levels of clarity in expressing our net zero calculations and the addition of missing stats on green health referrals. Thank you very much, Board. We now move on to item 7, paper 3, seasonal fire management bylaw. So this is for decision. And this paper sets out the wording for the seasonal fire management bylaw that will be consulted on subject to board approval for 12 weeks, starting on the 23rd of September 2024. Following that consultation, members will be asked in January next year to agree the final wording for submission to Scottish Ministers for approval. Before asking Grant Moore to introduce the paper, I'll again stress that the Board has reached this position extremely reluctantly. We faced a growing threat of wildfires for a combination of natural and human factors. We're continuing to employ all other means to preserve natural heritage, property and lives. But we have an obligation to act because of a small minority lighting recreational fires with no thought to the consequences. The Board has already agreed to a seasonal bylaw and demonstrated overwhelming public support for that. So this is now about agreeing the wording for consultation and not the final wording of the bylaw. With that said, I'll now ask Grant to introduce the paper. Grant.
Thanks, Andy, and I won't go over those points again. The main thing is obviously that the board discussed this on the 28th of June, and this is then the follow-up that was debated in that paper around the actual wording. The key bits that I just wanted to talk through very briefly are points 7, 8, 9 and 10 in the paper, which are around some issues that we discussed at the meeting and previously, which are around the dates. So the dates are set in the bylaw. We did look at the potential where you could have a clause to change that within the bylaw, but we advise that that is not possible. The only way to change dates is to go back through consultation again. So that's where we're at, and we feel that the current information is the 1st of April to the 30th of September is still the most appropriate dates. For the formal outdoor groups, we were asked about other provisions, and there are. So that's clauses 4D and 4C, which is that if you are an outdoor group and you have the agreement of the landowner, then you would be able to have a fire, and the same with 4D covers the farming side of things that we also previously discussed as well. There's an exemption within that as well. And then finally, just on Muir Burn, we've taken that part out as we discussed due to the fact that the Muir Burn licensing side of things will be coming in, so that will be covered by that, and thus we don't need to cover it within the bylaw specifically. So I think that's the key thing. It'll go for 12 weeks of consultation, and we'll publicise it wide and far. We have to do certain things because we're now into the statutory process that's set out in the National Parks Act and the bylaw side of things. So we've got to send it to all the community councils, we've got to send it to all the councils, and we've got to advertise it in a local newspaper and such like, because we have to do all those things because that's what it's set out. So we'll do all of that, but we'll also be doing our usual terms of promoting it through social media and any platforms that we have within the Park Authority. Once we get that feedback back, we'll obviously look at anything that people have said around any proposed changes to the bylaw, and then we will take the final bylaw to the board for a decision around the wording in January time. At that point, we then submit it to Scottish ministers, and Scottish ministers then have to have a period when they can take views from people on that final wording as well. And when we get back those agreements, we will then look to implement the bylaw. At present, we are looking at, roughly speaking, probably an implementation date of the 1st of June, but we'll need to see what that looks like in terms of when we get things back from Scottish Government, etc. So we're still a bit off that, but that's the sort of timescale associated with it. But happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We have questions or comments from Bill, followed by Paul. Bill.
This document is going out for consultation with the public. So when you consult with the public, you need to be clear and concise about what you're consulting them on. If you look at item 9, any person who contravenes any of the foregoing bylaws shall be guilty of an offence and shall be liable to, on summary conviction, to a fine not exceeding level 2 on the standard scale in respect of each offence. The public have no idea what that is. So would it not be better to, in quite simple terms, what the effect of the offence would be?
Yes, we will, but not in the legal wording, as in the consultation paper. Yes.
When we get to the legal documents, yes, that's the way it should be written. But in the consultation, if you do this, you'll be fined 50 quid or whatever.
Yeah. So in the covering bit of the consultation, it will set that out. There will still have to be the wording you have to consult on. So this will be in there as legal wording, but there will be something that says level 2 on the is X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul Gibb.
Yep, thanks. I'd just like to explore 10 Muir Burn, just to make sure that I understand it. So what, if any, action could a ranger be asked to take if Muir Burn was suspected to be carried out without a licence? What would they say to an individual who perhaps reported to them that Muir Burn, a visitor had reported to them that Muir Burn they thought was occurring illegally?
They reported that to a ranger. The ranger would pass that information on to Nature Scott.
What would they say to the individual?
The ranger would have to say that is for Nature Scott to investigate, because they would have the information whether it was or wasn't with a Muber licence, which we wouldn't necessarily have. So they would just have to be very straight back and say that's something that they would pass on that information from that person to NatureScot, and NatureScot would have to investigate that.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear. So there's no onus, no pressure on the ranger follow-up on if suspected that they're illegal. Thank you.
Because we would have no legal basis for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Paul again.
Yeah, thank you. I have a comment now. Let me clear that up. So my position at the last meeting, accepting the fact that there was support from the park demonstrated by the responsiveness survey, was not to support the bylaw unless it could be demonstrated that it could be enforced by the park, and this required detail on the policies, the training, the support for the ranger, as well as the mechanisms for charging, securing payment of any observed or reported offence. So I don't think it is sensible, because this information isn't provided in this report, which it was indicated at the last meeting that it would be, that we should make a proposal to the government for approval if we haven't yet demonstrated that we could enforce this bylaw. We could get into the difficult position of being granted permission to enforce the bylaw. We don't have the policies, the training, and support for the rangers to enforce it.
Well, the board agreed at the last meeting with a recommendation to approve the bylaw and take forward wording to the next meeting. That's what was agreed in the recommendations, and that's what we've done. In terms of the work with the rangers, that's under Colin's got a detail in terms of the training that will be done for the rangers during this period, in terms of how we enforce the bylaw. And that will all be in place before any bylaw comes into being. This is about the wording of the bylaw and making sure we're going to public consultation on the statutory side of things. So we've followed exactly what the board asked us to do as the recommendations from the last meeting.
So for clarity at the last meeting, it was indicated that the information on the training and the ability to enforce this would be presented to us at this meeting. It isn't here. So while accepting the fact that we should recommend bylaw, it was on the condition that this information would be present, and it's not, and therefore I can't.
I think point taken, and we are in a position to prepare that information for distribution to the board in the meantime for clarity. Sander.
And thanks to Grant for his clarity around whether we could put flexible wording. That was my request last time, was exploration of whether we could have flexible wording around the dates, and it's good to have a clear answer that we can. And you know, I think 1st of April to 30th of September does cover the bulk of it. There's going to be the odd year when Easter falls before the 1st of April, and you know, we'll deal with that as it comes. I actually just want to follow up on the question which was prompted around the Muirburn. If someone has conducted Muirburn without a licence, what is the penalty for that that SNH or NatureScot can impose, and would we also impose one if it was proven after the fact?
So in terms of the Muirburn licensing, it hasn't been fully agreed yet in terms of what that looks like. So the bill has gone through, but the actual Muirburn license regime won't come in place until next year. I suppose the sort of things will be in NatureScot's powers would be to, if you burnt out with it, you would probably be able to restrict people's ability to do Muirburn in the future, would be one of their ways of doing that. But that's all set out in the Muirburn bill. We wouldn't have any impact on that at all in terms of the fire management bylaws. So there wouldn't be any crossover between the two. But that's still, as I said, the bit of work in terms of exactly what Muirburn licensing looks like is still doing its sort of work with working groups in terms of how that is implemented. It wouldn't be in place next year.
Okay, so helpful, because we don't have clarity on that yet, but the actual section, the paragraph 10, does say that it's without lawful activity. So if they haven't got a license and they're doing the run without without a license, which is the lawful activity, then would we impose, if Nature Scot have proved after the fact and imposed their own conditions, would we then also impose our own fine after the fact?
I'll do that, Xander. I'll come back to you on that in terms of, I would think probably not, because it would double jeopardy, but I will have a look at what works across the two.
Okay, thank you. Questions from Russell Jones and Peter Cosgrove. Russell.
Thank you. A couple of times in the report it mentions a time of high fire risk as determined by Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Do Scottish Fire and Rescue Service actually determine a time of high fire risk? Because I had a few conversations about that over the last few months with the council, and it wasn't really clear that they do that. And obviously we have a huge area in the park, so it might be high fire risk on this side of it and not on the other side. So how does that work out in real life?
Yeah, so they are doing that in terms of the Wildfire Forum, as well as looking at, there's going to be a new way of pulling that information across into the Wildfire Forum's new website, so it'll be much clearer when those start and finish. So those things should link together, also in terms of the future. Going forward, I'm hopeful we had a good discussion with SFRS about that about a month ago or so.
Thank you, Peter Cosgrove.
Thank you. It was really just to pick up and echo Bill's point that our previous discussions we had talked about the fact that this bill would be effective if it acted as a deterrent. I think having a clear, plain English summary for people to read on what levels are available sooner rather than later would be quite helpful to the general discussion, because I think that's what we all want. We don't want to see fines issued, but it would be nice to know what they would be, ballpark figure.
Well, previously, yeah, I mean that's the consultation documents. There's a cover to the consultation document that sets this out more clearly with three simple questions in terms of the actual bylaw set of things. And we'll obviously circulate that to members before it goes out to the consultation on the 23rd of September. But it's the wording that needs to be agreed by the board, because that's what you're consulting on, is the legal text.
Any questions or comments? Paul?
Yeah, so maybe I'm asking here what's the appropriate thing to do. In our meeting in June, I stipulated that there were things that I needed to understand in order to support this, and they're not available to me. And I don't think that we should make a recommendation without first saying that we can support the bylaw, enforce the bylaw, and support the rangers who have to implement it. So I can't support this recommendation that we now go to consult on the bylaw, which in its wording is, apart from a little bit more simplicity, is fine. But I don't want to get into the position where we are then instructed by the Scottish Government to enforce a bylaw and we can't, because I just don't believe that we can until that's proven to me. So I can't support this. So I don't know if we need to raise an amendment to say that we should delay the consultation until that information is provided and that we can demonstrate that we can enforce it, or that I am able to say I abstain or I do not support this decision, and it's not a unanimous decision by the board. So I'm asking what is the right thing to do.
I mean, it's an absolutely reasonable question on the nature of the approach that we take to enforcement. The question for today is that of the wording of a proposed bylaw for consultation. We have further decisions to make before we go down the road that results in the point at which we're having that discussion with ministers. Let's say, I think in the meantime we can provide and should provide information to board members about the process that we're adopting to train our rangers and to ensure an effective enforcement process, if you're happy to work on that basis. Paul?
Sorry, I'm not. I just use the example that Grant made in his response to me, that this was agreed in June, we're going down this track, the train has left the station. If I don't record and it's noted that I'm not satisfied, then in the next meeting, if this is reported to be a unanimous decision, I'm therefore having to follow that process, and I don't want to get into that situation.
Point from David Cameron.
Thanks, convener. So my advice on Paul's comment is that there are two options open. One of them is that obviously the minutes of the meeting can record Paul's dissent or abstention from the decision. That doesn't remove Paul's obligation under collective responsibility to uphold decision by the board, so you are still bound by that collective responsibility in terms of taking that matter forward. The second option is, you mentioned the potential amendment to defer. If you want to put that forward, it obviously has to have a second for it to be a valid amendment to defer, and then there'd have to be vote. So that seems to be, from what I can see, the position that we've arrived at.
I mean, just to say, in terms of the recommendations are approved board last time, were to agree that the Park Authority develop a seasonal fire management bylaw from the 1st April to the 30th September each year for formal consultation this autumn. Agree the fire management bylaw does not cover Muirburn, as individual Muirburn licence conditions will cover Muirburn during periods of high fire risk, and agree that the Park Authority continue to work with the Scottish Government to ensure that fixed bellises can be issued for bylaw offences. You take the paper as per those recommendations, you've got the wording in front of you. That's what you asked us to bring back. Paul, you said that you did, but the board didn't amend the recommendations and didn't ask for that information to come back as part of this paper, which is about the wording. You asked for that, and I said, and there's an answer in the minutes, which.
Yeah, I think minutes is perhaps not on recording that I, in the debate, requested and was advised that there would be information around our ability to enforce that. And with that being presented at this meeting, I didn't have any objection to agreeing to the recommendation as it was written. So we're now in a situation where information isn't available at this point, and we're further down the line. Yeah, I want to be forced into this without not.
I think anyone's forced into it.
I don't get into a situation where I'm required to accept something. Thank you. Where I'm required to accept something that I don't accept without recording that I'm concerned that there's information that prevents us from enforcing this.
I think, just to clarify, Paul, absolutely that we record your dissent in the terms in which you've expressed your concerns, if you're happy to take that approach.
Would that be minuted clearly? Because the reason I ask is in Aberdeenshire Council process in the past, certain things aren't minuted, but I and it's not, so may I also be clear that it's not dissent about the consultation and the wording and the desire by residents in the community to have a bylaw. It's that I'm not comfortable at this stage that we can enforce it, and therefore I don't think we're ready to go to the Scottish Government, and I don't think we're yet ready to speak to the perform the consultation, because we're going down that track of saying we can do this, and this is what it's going to look like.
Thank you very much, and again I think your point of dissent is clear. David?
You've said it, convener. I mean, in terms of the actual recording in the minute, Paul, of your position, we'd make sure myself and the clerks that the wording of that part of the minute is agreed with yourself, so that we could be absolutely clear in that minute what the wording of the nature of your dissent is. I take very much from what you've just said. It's your reservation about the enforceability of the bylaw if it went forward, but we would make sure that we agreed that wording with you.
I'm very comfortable with that. Thank you.
ask for a 5-minute recess so we could discuss this off table, and before Paul made up his mind which way he wanted to jump, but he's made up his mind now, I think.
I think if Paul is content with the position as discussed and agreed, then we continue the meeting. And thank you, Paul, and thank you, David, for the clarification. Are there any other questions or comments? Hannah Christ.
What feels now like a very boring question on wording, so I'm sorry to bring it back to that. It was actually just around under the section on barbecues about a licensed caravan site. I know there are other kind of types of licensed camping sites in the park. I know there are kind of slightly more informal airs. What's the situation on some of the small businesses that might want to allow within their curtilage, but don't come into the licensed caravan site?
Yeah, so that's the Act that gives caravan sites, campsites, their license, and the licenses for smaller sites that don't fill the threshold to apply for a full license as well. So if anything that's covered under that is all the stuff you would expect. So it shouldn't have any effect on any small operators, because the small ones that don't require to apply for a license have one because they're underneath that threshold, so they're covered by the Act.
Okay. So that would be clear to the. I'm just worried about businesses or people that are interested in doing these kind of airs, whatever, want to make sure that they have.
Yeah, that's something else we can pick up in the kind of the summary overview. So and in the kind of plain English side of it.
Thank you very much. Are there any other? Oh, sorry, Sander.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to make a comment before we wrap up. I think it's important to re-emphasise the point made at the start that we haven't gone into having a bylaw lightly. This park authority has avoided having bylaws for any topic for 20 years and has really got to this point as a point of last resort because of the situation and because of the demands in the community, from the community, meeting with the community. And this is not us essentially jumping for regulation as a first step. This is us basically getting here as the last possible option after several years of having a successful ranger engagement programme, but not being able to mitigate the significant risk to the park that is posed by these fire risks. So I think it's just worth re-emphasising that point, given that we have always avoided this up until this point. And I think often people perceive national parks, regulation, etc., but we have been very reluctant to ever impose a bylaw for the last 20 years on any topic, and we only got here as a point of last resort.
Thank you very much for those comments. I think that reflects the views of the entire board on this issue. Just looking to wrap up now, but we've got a question from Peter Cosgrove.
Grant, it's just a quick question about controlled burning that's not muir burn in a woodland setting. I picked this up because I've had discussions previously with Jiva about woodland management and people burning patches of scrub at not farmers but actually woodland managers and woodland companies. Where would this be picked up in this bylaw?
Yes, that's the same thing, which is that landowners have exemptions around that. So if somebody wanted to do that within the woodland, it would still be.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. There being no further questions or comments, so the board is asked to agree the wording of the fire management bylaw for a 12-week statutory consultation in terms of the National Park Scotland Act 2000. Is the board content to proceed on that basis, and that is noting and minuting the dissent raised by Paul Gibb in the terms he used? Is the board content to proceed on that basis? Thank you very much, board. we now move on to item 8, P4, Code of Conduct addition. The paper seeks to update the Park Authority's Code of Conduct with additions based on the provisions for quasi-judicial and regulatory activities and decision-making approved by the Standards Commission for Scotland in the Model Code for Councillors. Now, this is for decision, and the board is being asked to approve the proposed additional provisions set out in Annex 1 and to agree the submission of the updated Code of Conduct to Scottish Ministers for approval. This is introduced by David Cameron, Director of Corporate Services and Deputy CEO. David.
Thanks, Convener. I actually think it's been very well introduced by you, actually, rather than me. I don't have very much more to say on this. Just to reiterate to the board, we identified a little bit a gap in the adequate coverage of our Code of Conduct. There was an omission in the Model Code issued by the Standards Commission for non-departmental public bodies on this area of work the park authorities in particular undertake as boards. We've replicated the wording from the Councillors' Code. We've agreed the wording in front of you with the Standards Commission's officers as appropriate addition into the Park Authority's Code of Conduct. I've also liaised with colleagues at Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park Authority, and they are implementing the same wording as is posed to this board today, so that there's consistency of approach between the two national park authorities. So I don't think I need to say anything more by way of introduction, and happy to pick up any questions. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you very much. Sander.
Thanks. And don't have any issues with the proposed introduction. I'm just curious in terms of stakeholder engagement. It doesn't mention if this was taken to the Governance Committee before it was brought to board, which obviously has happened previously.
Yes, spoke about the Governance Committee, stated the fact of the omission and talked about options for taking this forward, so it's all been through Governance Committee already.
Any other questions or comments? I mean, this is a tidying up process. So, is the board content to approve the proposed additional provisions set out in Annex 1 and to agree the submission of the updated Code of Conduct to Scottish Ministers for approval? Thank you very much. Paper 5, item 9. Which is Standing Orders Election of Planning Committee Deputy Convener. So the paper notifies the board of the Planning Committee Deputy Convener's upcoming end of term of appointment and of the election process for this role. It's for decision. The board is being asked to agree the process for election of the Planning Committee Deputy Convener as set out in the paper. Again, this one is introduced by David Cameron. David.
Thanks again, Convener. And so just to add that the paper proposes that we again follow a remote the election process, as we have done successfully for a number of other elections previously. We've set out a draft timetable in paper, and I don't think I need to say anything else by way of introduction. Happy to pick up on any questions.
Sander.
Yeah, sorry, David, it's me with all the procedural questions. The current standing order provision, on the assumption of it being in person, allows candidates to give a statement in the meeting, which is obviously a public forum. I'm aware that after previous elections we received an FOI for those statements, which we then released. Could we just agree as part of this paper that those statements will be made public as they would be as if they had been made in a meeting, and just skip the step where somebody makes an FOI request for them and we release them anyway?
Thanks for Sander. We've actually been doing that since the FOI that came in from the first time, so we now as a standard practice, and sorry I've forgotten to add that into the paper because it's become part of what we do, but you're quite right to flag it up. So if there's a competition, if there are multiple candidates, we'll have the statement in writing, and that statement I make clear to the candidates goes onto the website and becomes a document.
Thank you very much. Are there questions or comments? None, in which case is the board content to agree the process for election of the Planning Committee Deputy Convener as set out in this paper? Thank you very much. We are on agreement, and I think we'll now take a 10-minute comfort break and reconvene at 11:30. Sorry,
Sorry, I just come in at the end of that paper. Can I just say that I'm not standing for re-election to the Deputy Planning Convener position, but I'm more than happy to speak to anybody that is interested to give them an idea of what the commitment is and what the expectations are. We really need one of you to step forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. And as ever, yet again, thank you for everything you've done for the Planning Committee and the current role that you're in. It's still not gone yet in that respect, but thanks for that commitment and the support that you're showing as ever for your successor. With that, we'll now take a 10-minute comfort break and reconvene at 11:30. Thank you. Folks, if we could take our seats again, we're about to resume the live stream. Board, the live stream has resumed. We're moving on to item 10, paper 6, the Cairngorms Nature Action Plan final report. So this paper presents the report detailing delivery of priorities, actions and targets in the Cairngorms Nature Action Plan 2019 to 2024. It's for approval prior to publication. It considers the role of the Cairngorms Nature Partnership as the key mechanism directing and delivering conservation in the National Park and the National Park Partnership Plan Nature Objectives. It's for decision, and it's introduced by Andy Ford, Director of Nature and Climate Change. Andy.
Thank you very much, Convener. Yes, as the introduction stated, this is the report for the last Cairngorms Nature Action Plan, which focused activity not just for the Park Authority but for the wider partnership as well. So I think what it does is it celebrates the overall success of conservation in the park. It celebrates the outstanding nature that we have in the Cairngorms, the best connected forest habitats, the largest functioning floodplains, the outstanding 25% of rare and endangered species. So the report attempts to celebrate all of that really great conservation in the park. It celebrates the wide partnership because, as I said, this isn't just the Park Authority, this is the work of many different land managers, organisations, individuals, communities, etc. It highlights some of the challenges of species conservation and reflects on how, whilst we do need to focus on key species outcomes, we also need to bear in mind that species survival ultimately lies in well-functioning, resilient ecosystems. This might be a good point to point out that actually there is a small typo in the recognition of achievement of species targets. It says 12 and it should read 22, which is a slight difference. And we will correct that obviously for the final publication. I think it also demonstrates how well placed Cairngorms Nature has been and will continue to be in terms of the delivery of the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy, and again recognising that whilst there are some species we need to take focused action for, that the long-term gain is in resilient functioning landscape scale conservation. And finally, I would just note that this report not only describes the actions in order for the partners to see delivery very specifically about the actions that we have reported against. It's also a celebration of work and it's a celebration of the partnership. So it's trying to do all of those things in one report. And that's the only introduction I'll make.
Thank you very much, Andy. It is an incredible record of achievement, not just by the National Park, but clearly all the partners, the charities, community groups be contributing to this, along with the significant challenges. So on to questions and comments, and Chris Beattie.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, Andy, I find this a very positive report. You actually covered a lot of things that I want to point out about this report, but I would like to point out that I think this demonstrates the difference between the physical landscape projects we are involved in and the challenges with biological systems and individual species conservation. They don't always go entirely as planned, but great progress made across a lot of species there. So I'd just like to really end this by saying that I'm really looking forward to the next iteration and work with the partners over the next few years to share a nature strategy. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chris. Any other questions or comments? Peter Cosgrove.
Thank you. I want to congratulate the staff and the partners behind all this important work. And I know from personal experience that trying to measure outputs and success on these things is very difficult to do, and particularly to put it into a wider context. So seeing things like the species recovery curves is helpful, and I know it's not easy to get those to be objective, but I commend you for doing that. One of the things that I picked up for reading, and I just wonder if it's possible this is more a comment about the future, and this is to sort of start to articulate the problems that we have around climate change. Just saying climate change, and this isn't an accusation of what you're doing, but just saying climate change problems or climate change is a threat is not very helpful, because climate change can affect things from in terms of sort of habitat space going up the hill. As things get warmer, there's no space for animals to move. It can be destruction of rivers through increased massive floods and things. So I think trying to look at how we might smartly spend money in the future will be helped if we can sort of articulate what it is and tease out what it is that climate change threatens, both possibly at the species level, but I also get that the ecosystem resilience is where the direction of travel we're going in for most of our effort, but I think that will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have follow-up questions and comments from Jackie Brereton, John Kirk and Eleanor McIntosh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, it's a really positive report, and I think it gives such a lot of material to go forward with and points to pick up. I suppose my overall slight disappointment was the lack of any kind of socioeconomic feedback around the impact of the amazing nature work that's going on, but how that's benefited or provide challenges for the local business community. I think particularly focusing on the opportunities, that do you feel that going forward there could be more engagement with the small business community to make sure that they're fully on board with the nature action plans and able to develop the opportunities that they present for them? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is reporting against the current targets, and you're quite right. They are focused largely on community engagement, and there's certainly opportunity for us to expand that into wider benefits, and that would fit with it delivering across the National Park Partnership Plan and not just looking at nature in isolation, which it of course shouldn't.
Thank you. Questions from John Kirk, Eleanor McIntosh, Anne Ross and Bill. John.
One of the things that always, and I've mentioned it before, is nature disturbance and no-go areas. I mean, I don't know what thoughts there is, and whether it's something for the future we should be looking at nesting times and certain times of the year to restrict public access. It's, I think, very important that we look to that in the future.
Andy?
Yeah, I think that's one of the key learnings from the Kelly project, which is the effects of disturbance, which we knew was a big causer of decline. That is now included in the Capra Emergency Plan, and it's also included in the Active Cairngorms Action Plan. So I think the Park Authority will be doing quite a bit of work around that in delivering active cairngorms.
Just to say on that point, John, that we're taking a report back on a year of the Active Cairngorms Action Plan to the next board in November. So we'll update people on that bit in terms of there's been work going on in that. And then just on the other point, which from Jackie's point of view on the socioeconomic, I think one of the things we do need to think about is how we can better quantify where the money's, because obviously the money, and I said this previously, money doesn't actually go to wood ants. It pays for somebody to do work who is employed within the park, and there's quite a lot of socioeconomic impact of the work over 5 years that has flowed through from this plan into actual jobs and such like, and we can probably we can do some of that looking back the way, but we probably haven't collected it very well over the past 5 years, but certainly for the next action plan we can make that one of the key things of understanding the economic impact of all the work that's been done on nature within the park.
Thank you. Ellen.
Yeah, good report, Andy. Well done to all involved. But there are some red areas in that, and I suppose I'm looking forward to the next. There's going to be a next plan. What is the time scale for that? Because is there something around that we've got the final report today, but we haven't got the next one? And, you know, should it not be more seamless? I don't know. Maybe it is, and it just hasn't reached us yet. But I just wondered an idea of time scale, I suppose.
Andy.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think one of the reasons that the next one is still in development is because there's so much legislation through at the moment, and there's also so much strategic guidance and policy around 30 by 30, nature networks, Scottish biodiversity strategy, statutory targets for nature. So the next one must incorporate all of that and demonstrate how we can deliver all of that in the national park. I think the other thing about timescales is the next one also look to further than 25 to 2030. It must also look to that longer term vision of sustainable systems by 2045. But the reason that they're not contiguous is because it's trying to take account of all of those big policy shifts at the moment and make sure that the action plan is an accurate representation of things like nature networks 30 by 30.
Thank you. Anne Ross, followed by Bill Lobbin. Anne.
I note, it hasn't got a page number, the fresh pearl mussels is amber. And I see that the actions are to improve the riparian management, survey suitable habitat and support a reintroduction translocation project. And it says 2019 species recovery curve, position R1, target position R2. My concern is the River Dee. And it is one of the only, I think I'm right in saying this, freshwater rivers where public water supplies Aberdeen, for example, city. The water for Aberdeen city is taken from the River Dee. And there's an awful lot of water for, you know, it supports the Deeside community, the city of Aberdeen as well. There's an awful lot of water being taken out of the River Dee now to support the population. And I'm concerned that that is having an effect upon the pearl mussels in the Dee. What can we do? I don't think there's much we can do, but what can we do to protect the mussels in that situation? Thanks.
Just on that, yes, it is a really big issue that you've identified being addressed by the Dee Resilience Strategy Group and other initiatives, but there are answers to the fundamental question. I'll ask Andy to that.
I think the question illustrates a number of points. First of all is the challenge of looking at species conservation in isolation, and so which is why we tend to or are steering towards looking at restoration of systems in which freshwater pearl mussel will survive. So I think that's the sort of bigger answer, and as Sandy suggested there is a programme in place now to look at the resilience of the system, and that's bringing together all the public agencies and all of the different fisheries interest, management interest, community interest, etc. I think one of the things around that is the fact that we cannot have single organisations with single issues and single outcomes. So it shouldn't be that one public agency is trying to deliver one policy agenda within a catchment and another is trying to deliver a different policy agenda without those being aligned. So abstraction must be aligned with biodiversity, etc., and restoration, etc. And that's where the Park Authority focuses its efforts, is in trying to align the policy outcomes so that we're not just looking at one species, but we're making sure that delivery across a suite of actions. And that, again, is that shift towards ecosystem resilience and restoration. I think the thing specifically with the freshwater pearl mussel is that it's taken some time to get the translocation project underway. It's a heavily designated species. It's a heavily designated system into which it's going. In places, it's also a heavily degraded system, and I would say it's probably Storm Frank that's had the biggest impact on freshwater pearl mussel in the Dee. And so we need to make sure that the habitats are in good condition so that we can restore species within that, which is the sustainable way to do it.
Thank you. It's interesting because my concern is without the freshwater mussels, we don't have salmon. Without the salmon, we don't have the freshwater mussels. And that has, and we talked Jackie was talking about socio-economic impact, and that has a big effect on the Deeside communities, from the top of the valley to the bottom. So thank you.
Absolutely. If ever there was an illustration of nature and people and the need for both to thrive together, it's that. Thank you. And Bill.
A very minor point. In the RIC project, it mentions the very successful Pine Hover Plan programme, but it doesn't mention the RZSS, and I think it should.
Point taken, but Andy?
Yeah, no, if it's not mentioned, that's an oversight. Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments? None. Thank you very much. Is the board content to note key achievements of the partnership in delivery against targets and approve the publication of the report? Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks, Andy, for the report. Move on to item 11, paper 7, minutes from committee meetings being presented for information, and any points by exception. They're introduced by David Cameron, Director of Corporate Services and Deputy CEO. David?
Nothing to add by introduction, Convener. I think, as you say, they're there for information. If there are any questions, happy to pick those up by exception. Obviously, when we send these minutes out, we expect any kind of operational or detailed questions just to come direct to staff, and we'll deal with those outside of the board, but happy to pick up in anything that might be of significance.
Thank you. Question from Eleanor McIntosh.
It's probably not significant, but is it new that the planning committee minutes have started coming around with this lot? Because I just think it's overkill, and I would doubt if folk would be reading them as well as reading them prior to planning meetings, if you see what I'm getting at. And given that planning meetings are every 6 weeks, I don't really see the point in them being here unless it's some governance requirement.
I think it is, yes, Eleanor, it is new. We haven't been doing it as a matter of course. I think we went back and looked back at part of the rationale for doing this both is good governance and communication, and also adherence to previous and audit recommendations, which was recognising that the role of the board was to have oversight of all of its committees, and the planning committee still kind of effectively sits as a committee of the board. So we thought for completeness it would be appropriate just to mop all of these things together. I personally agree with you. I think they're already transparently reported and in the public domain through the planning committee processes. I'm happy to take the board's view as to whether we want to amend that or adapt that. We can perhaps pick that up at governance committee and decide what we want to do in taking that forward.
Thank you very much. Does the board have any strong views either way on this issue? None, in which case, quite sure, carry on, I suppose. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the reports? None. Thank you very much. Is the board content to note the minutes from the committee meetings?
Noted.
Thank you again. Item 12, EOCB, nothing has been notified. None. Thank you very much. Item 13, the date of the next formal board meeting being the 22nd of November 2024. That can, sorry.
So just going to add on the 22nd November, that was the date that we'll be looking at doing the Horizon scanning session as well. That's what was referred to by Sandy.
For repeating that point, thank you. That said, that concludes the formal board meeting. Thank you very much, members, staff, and those watching and listening online. Thank you very much.